Welcome to What Dogs Have Taught Me. I'm your host, Julie Hart, and I'm so excited to have you all listen to my podcast with none other than Martha Hoffman. I started studying Martha's thoughts and observations about the Bali Heritage Dog probably about a year ago. And I love reading her posts and just thought she was so interesting and has such a depth of knowledge about dogs and dog behavior. So I'm so excited to have Martha on my show. Here's a little bit about Martha's background before we get started. Martha Hoffman, hearing impaired since birth, has been training dogs to support the deaf since 1979. As a training director for the hearing dog program in the U.S. for 30 years, she was involved in the selection, training, and placement of over 500 hearing dogs and service dogs, as well as evaluating and instructing their human partners. She is the author of the definitive and highly respected text on hearing dog training called Lend Me an Ear. Martha has temperament tested over 20,000 dogs for suitability and for this work, and observed the behavior of over 200,000 shelter dogs and puppies. Martha has trained many dogs to excel in service dog tasks, hearing dog alerts, tracking, film, stage, tricks, cancer detection, bed bug detection, herding, and diabetic alerting. Martha helped found a diabetic alert dog program and taught at the Bergen University for Canine Studies. She has given seminars worldwide and taught online extensively. She now lives in Bali, where she photographs and studies the behavior of the Bali Heritage Dog. Martha has a Patreon account where you can see more about her interactions with Bali Dogs at patreon.com/faunabotanica. Please see the link in the description and also links to her to her book and her Facebook page. Just FYI, if you hear a little chirping in the background, there's lots of birds in Bali that are on the recording. So enjoy. Welcome, Martha Hoffman, to What Dogs Have Taught Me. And I really appreciate you being here. I've followed you a long time on Facebook. And I love reading the stories about the Bali dogs and also your observations about dogs and training. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful to be here.
So how's your morning? I think I hear a
Good.
few little chirps, but
yeah, not too bad.
Which is nice.
There's also a house being built across the street.
Oh wow. Oh geez.
And a guy may come to pick up some parts of my computer. But hopefully that'll only be a few minutes.
Right.
No, this morning I went for a walk and I got footage of two puppies playing with a big bone, and a puppy going up to a dog it was always scared of that's chained up before, and puppies being shooed out of people's houses, and the puppies being shooed away by a farmer with a rock.
Oh my gosh.
Lots of action.
So do you go for a walk every morning and record whatever you come across, or how does that work?
Yeah. Oh, I have these different routes to different dogs. There's different little parts of the village that have dogs I know and follow. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I just go on a random walk through the dog desert where there are no dogs. And but when I finally get to the place I'm going, usually there's a bunch of dogs and that are kind of used to me. Yeah. And so they're naturally. And I carry tribute. I carry deep fried pork rinds. It's the highest value thing I can give them to distract the ones that have puppies or just want to bark at me and say, please let me pass.
Right.
Pork rinds.
How long have you been there?
6 years now.
Oh wow. Okay, so you're adjusted and moved in and all that stuff.
Yeah. The first two, I moved here 6 months before COVID, so the first 2 years were complicated and boring, but I adjusted, and it's a great culture here. People are really friendly, and just very welcoming, and they're used to tourists, so they would tolerate some things that maybe if you went to a tiny village, people would be annoyed or repulsed. But almost everybody is really friendly and helped me learn the language, and it's just great people, great people here.
Usually I like to just have people start with a little bit of their history, how they got into dog training and that sort of thing, because sometimes I don't know my guests' history, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners don't know. So go ahead and give me the rundown.
Oh, okay. Well, I was always crazy about animals, like a lot of us, and I was not allowed to have a dog. We traveled a lot, moved to different places, and that was the excuse anyway. So I kind of tried all these other pets that I love dearly, but it was always like dog are the most fascinating. And so when I finally got my own dog, after I got out of college, he was a Yorkie, and I've always been hard of hearing since birth. And I had vaguely heard there was some mysterious thing called a hearing dog. At that time, there was one program that trained them, and I didn't know anything about it or how to find out. And so, but I thought, oh, okay. So I taught him to bark when the phone rang and the doorbell was there. And, as Yorkies go, they're all pretty barky.
Yeah.
So that was easy. I taught him that if the phone rang, I would run to it because he liked running with me. And that was my first kind of lesson that, oh, you don't have to just do the treat thing. You could sort of build energy. And so, but I knew how to train lots of tricks, and I'd read, I'd read all the early behavior books, and what is his name? Dr. Miller. So I trained him so many tricks and behaviors, and he wouldn't do a thing unless he wanted to. And so then I started going to an obedience class. It was a really great class. It was a friendly, fun class. For the time, it was extremely positive. And I had a blast. And then I started really learning. And then the teacher persuaded me to enter obedience competitions and AKC obedience. And I had a blast with that. And my dog was just so fabulous. He figured out different alerts, which is something a lot of hearing dogs do. If their original trained alert doesn't work for them, they will invent a new alert.
Yeah.
At the time, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was sort of impressed because I had a dark room. I was living in Manhattan and I had a small loft. So I had built a dark room. And when I was in the dark room and the phone rang, my dog would scratch at the door. And I was so impressed because, like, normally he would be barking or jumping on me. Wow, this is interesting. He's figuring out all these different ways to accomplish his goal, which is to get me to do things and give him treats. So anyway, I moved to California and I got myself a border collie, and she and my Yorkie were great. I taught my border collie to be a hearing dog because I got a job at the hearing dog program. I was really lucky. At the time, there were no jobs for anything related to dogs except minimum wage poop picking up.
Mm.
So I spent the next 25 years at the hearing dog program. And the hearing dog program is still ongoing, and now I'm on the board of directors, but I've retired, so I moved to Bali. And in between all that time, I did every dog sport I could possibly find. I was just absolutely crazy about all the dog sports, and my border collie wanted to do everything. And then I got a Malinois. The computer guy has to come in. I had an emergency. Do you mind waiting a little bit? Okay.
No,
so while all the noise is going on, we could still chat.
That's funny. Yeah, at the hearing dog program, I was reading in your bio that you evaluated, I don't know, thousands of dogs, basically. And so you guys were looking for a certain temperament, I assume.
Yeah. So we're just going to talk at random because of the dog barking, and you can edit it. Or you just ask me the same questions later.
Yeah.
Whatever you want. I mean, I'm flexible. Yeah. So I wrote my book, Lend Me an Ear, about the temperament testing, temperament evaluations. So about a third of the book is temperament evaluation protocol for shelter dogs and fostered dogs. And because I had to, the mission of the program was to rescue shelter dogs and place them as hearing dogs. And what happened was that I realized that there were just so few dogs that passed the evaluations. But in order to find a dog, I might have to go to 7 shelters in one day, driving from shelter to shelter in Central and Northern California. Each shelter might have from 50 to a few hundred dogs. So I might easily see 500 to 700 dogs in one day, meaning I walk past their kennels.
Yeah.
And I might test 10 or 12 that had passed the initial evaluations, basically, which is the dog is in a kennel behind bars. It's still friendly. It wants to approach, and it is confident and happy. And I do a lot of my testing outside the bars for safety and because I want to know how the dog behaves with barrier frustration. If I can weed that out, if I can weed out barrier frustration, barrier aggression, territoriality, fearfulness when in an enclosed space, that's a big step forward in knowing whether I've got a dog I should continue testing or not.
Yeah.
So when they're in the cage is an excellent reveal of quite a few traits.
So a lot of people, because I'm super interested in temperament, and because I've been doing rescue, I choose the dogs for the rescue. And I happen to like the fearful projects, but that's not for everyone. So
yeah,
a lot of people would say, well, that's not fair because they're behind a barrier.
Yeah.
I think it is fair because it tells you a lot about the dog, but I'm sure you've heard that before.
Well, I have. Yeah. So the thing with the barrier is people make excuses because the dog is so different when they take it out of the kennel. And that must be its real personality. And sometimes its real personality is different and maybe better, maybe worse outside the kennel. But inside the kennel, there's a wall between you and the dog. So the dog, if it feels territorial, it might try to make you back off from the bars. If it's fearful, it might run away, but it might also seem more confident than it is because the bars give it security.
Right.
Let's say the dog is extremely friendly and desperate to make contact. It will be swarming all over the bars, and the bars won't make a bit of difference. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my testing is outside the kennel. I'm standing there, and I've been neutral, and I'm standing there with my side to the bars, and then I very slowly turn around and face the dog. So frontal posture is threatening, but I'm not doing anything. At that point, a lot of dogs select themselves out of the process. Mm-hmm. When I turn to face them from a sideways position, they back off, they look intimidated, and they might step a few steps away. Or they might lunge at the bars aggressively. But either way, I've weeded out the dogs that don't like frontal posture. If the dog is friendly and continues wanting to interact, and all of my testing is designed so that it's very gradual steps. If I see any stress, if I see any fear or aggression, I move on to the next dog. I'm not like the kennel staff who have to complete a temperament evaluation in order to see what's there. Mm-hmm. So for the hearing dog program, I could adopt dogs that didn't pass that were going to be great pets. But mostly I was just looking for these dogs that passed everything, gradually increasing stress so that there is no effect on their adoptability. I want to leave the dog more adoptable after my evaluation, not less. And that's why I leave as soon as the dog is stressed.
Yeah.
The other thing about the kennels is that outside the kennel bars, I'm mimicking several different types of people. I'm mimicking a man with a low voice, women with high voices, kids with baby voices. I'm mimicking behaviors, like is that too much barking?
It is what it is. We're all done.
It is what it is. Also. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm going to mimic a man, and I'm going to adopt a frontal posture. I'm going to clap my hands. I'm going, hey, puppy, come here, get over here. Yeah, good dog. And I might make a little patting motion. So a lot of dogs, okay, they're afraid of men. Go on to the next dog. I act like a child, just the silly fast movements and a hi puppy, oh puppy, and that screams out a few dogs. And if the dog likes men, women, and children as mimicked by me, that's more information. At that point, I start to make movements, and I will raise my hand above my head in a neutral posture. A lot of dogs back off. Mm-hmm. Either they've been hit or genetically they don't like things over their head. Either way, not going to work for public access. If I make a tapping motion on the kennel bars, a soft sound, the slight hitting movement, if the dog is afraid, I have to move on. At that point, I might make some slight tapping sounds on the bars. If the dog is afraid of a slight tapping sound, I'm certainly not going to test it with beepers and smoke alarms and all the other stuff. So that kind of weeds out the ones that are very, very fearful of sounds. So far, I've got a dog that is thrilled, absolutely thrilled to have me outside the kennel no matter what silly thing I'm doing. And so I'm really happy. I touch the dog with my hands outside the kennel, and my question is, does the dog want to be touched back? Does the dog want to me? I touch my hand to the outside of the kennel. My question is, does the dog touch me back? Does the dog make contact? If it makes contact, I might scratch it a little bit, but that's a good sign because the dog isn't letting the bars interfere with what it thinks of me as a potential friend. If it puts its paws up at the bars, I might touch its toe. If it jerks its toe back and is horrified and leaves, well, okay. That's not terrible, but it's not a good sign either. I don't expect the dog to let me pet its feet. But the whole purpose of this is, does the dog show barrier aggression when it's in a kennel? So if I make slight, mild eye contact, what does the dog do? And this is most important because in public, one problem with the public and service dogs is they stare at the dog. They're not used to seeing a dog wherever they are. And usually the dog has a vest on with interesting patches, and lettering, and they look to see, well, what the heck is this? What is this? What's with this clothing and these booties and this signage? And sometimes I feel that less signage, the better. A lot of people go all in for all kinds of patches, but really whatever makes people look less at the dog is better, because even a good dog will get stressed out by people staring at it. But what I want is a dog that when I give mild eye contact from outside the kennel, doesn't run away and doesn't jump forward aggressively. I want the dog that notices the eye contact and is like, oh, you're looking at me. I'm so little and I'm really harmless and I really like you, but I'm so harmless. And it shows appeasing behavior to the eye contact. And also acceptable is the dog that is so confident and friendly, it doesn't even notice the eye contact. It's just like, oh boy, oh boy. So as you can see, I'm looking for a dog that is friendly to a stranger, no matter what stranger. And that gives it the insulation to tolerate public access. Mm-hmm. As you can see, a lot of dogs have already self-selected themselves out of this whole process.
Right.
So then comes the time for hard eye contact. And that's a real important thing, because men often like to stare at dogs and challenge them. Kids stare at them because they're curious. Everybody stares. But hard eye contact where I stand still and stare at the dog is really a game changer for most dogs. And what I want is the dog sees the hard eye contact and goes into appeasement mode. Oh, you're threatening me. Well, I'm really still want to be your friend, and that's great. Or the dog that is like, doesn't care if I'm giving it death bolts from my mean old eyes, So at that point, I might open the kennel door. But everything so far has been designed to screen out barrier frustration, which the dog is going to experience on a leash. A leash is a barrier. And A car is a barrier. A yard is a barrier. The corner of an airport is a barrier. A restaurant table is a barrier. Or a refuge that the dog can defend. But all of these things, if a dog shows barrier frustration in the kennel, you can predict that it will show it other places.
Right.
It might or might not be a problem. But then we get barrier aggression. And if the dog responds to the barrier with any kind of aggression, then you know, oh, it's not just that he's stressed in the kennel. It's not just that he'll be fine when he's out, because he is fine when he's out. It's the dog previously learned to defend a yard, a door, a house, a car, or when it's on a leash, it feels the barrier is there and it has learned to respond with forward aggression, or that's just its temperament. So that's fatal to any kind of service dog potential.
Honestly, I wouldn't choose a dog with that behavior for adoption either.
Right.
Because there's so many, like you said, with the hard eye contact. I'll do that sometimes if I'm like, I'm not sure about this dog, and I'll kind of do the same thing. And 9 out of 10, they'll be like, woo, 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 and they'll either back up or they'll like come forward. And I'm like, well, I don't really want either one of those in a dog that's easy to adopt, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. And the average shelter volunteer or shelter worker is ready to excuse almost any bad behavior because they love the dog. I mean, it's natural. But it's also natural for the dog to resume that kennel behavior once it gets into a home and settles in. Yeah, as you say. And the alarm barking, that's a bad sign. Alarm barking is a response to recruit the rest of the social group to help out. And it's a fearful barking. And the dog wants some social support against whatever it's barking at. So both that barking indicating fear and aggressive barking indicating, charging toward you, neither is acceptable, probably in a pet or a service dog.
This is fascinating. I didn't know you had written a book, but I'm going to buy it now because I want to read the whole process. I think what's interesting, because I live in New Mexico and the people I've mentored under, Temperament was really important to them too. They're very good at reading it. And I've seen some posts that you've made where you mentioned dogs that won't bite. And I think you get a little bit of pushback on those because people are like, well, any dog will bite. And maybe that's true, but I have one that you would really have to try really, really hard. And she's a therapy dog, to get that dog to bite you. I mean, it's just, and in New Mexico, the bite inhibition is very interesting. And this is on one of our things, I think, to talk about later. But I think in a lot of places, people don't get the opportunity to see these kinds of dogs. I don't think they're very common, and a lot of people don't have them, especially if they're dog trainers. People aren't calling them about these dogs. Because they're not a problem, right? Dog trainers see the problem dogs, and so they don't get to experience this kind of temperament, which I think is really unfortunate because they're fantastic.
Well, you're absolutely right. And they are a treasure. And they're pretty rare because complete bite inhibition is not, I don't think, trained. I mean, I think that training can create bite inhibition as far as mouthing, and it can create a dog that doesn't want to challenge you. But when a dog is really stressed, does it defend itself?
Yeah.
It's kind of the question. And there are many, many dogs. I've tested hundreds of dogs that would not bite. And some people would say that, well, how do you test it if you're not abusing it? And because my evaluations go slowly, step by step, I'm not doing anything that would be surprising or painful until the dog has shown that it tolerates everything else, all handling. So handling's really important. And I want to touch the dog all over. Of course, if it resists, if it tenses up and freezes, I have to put it back in the kennel. The program I worked for, the hearing dog program, We had about 6 months to train dogs or more if we needed it, but there was no extra months for rehab. We didn't have a big foster program. We had to have dogs that were absolutely non-aggressive, non-fearful, right from the start, and then work with them to get them ready. So if a dog protests at being handled, it's not really acceptable for hearing dog, for me. And the protest could be something, if it's something really gentle, like one thing I've experienced is a dog that when I'm touching a part of its body, it very gently takes my hand in its teeth and very gently moves my hand away. I think, okay, that's creative. That's not a threat. That's like removing a burr that's sticking to their fur. It's not personal. But I've met so many dogs that one of the crucial tests is after we've adopted them, we immediately had to take them to the vet. They always had, parasites, kennel cough, whatever. They had to go to the vet right away. No time for training them to tolerate handling. Right. And when they got their blood drawn and were restrained by techs and getting injections and their ears flushed from some horrible infection, that was also the true temperament test. If the dog can wriggle as much as it wants, it can yelp, it can thrash around, but if it tries to bite, that's not good. That's revealing things under more stressful conditions than I could at the shelter. However, at the shelter, I'm also handling them in ways they don't like. I'm handling them all over their bodies. I'm handling their mouth, their ears, their paws. If they don't like it, they can pull away. They can walk away, but they cannot threaten me. And I've just met so many dogs that when I've done, for instance, the food guarding with the assess a hand, they will not bite that hand. And if they absolutely won't bite the hand, sometimes I'll risk my own hand. I mean, I've met dogs that usually they're Chihuahua mixes, and you often see them on YouTube. Somebody's doing something really intrusive and annoying to a Chihuahua, and it's going through all of the, and it looks like it's absolutely ripping their hand apart, but it's not. Yeah. It's just going through the motions. It's not clamping down at all. And so here's a dog that shows its feelings, but it refuses to bite, even though the person on the YouTube video is going way beyond what any of us would do in terms of tormenting a poor little dog to make a cute video.
Right.
And I've just met many dogs that would not defend themselves even if you were killing them. I can't prove that because I'm not going to go that far, right. But that's my belief.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I mean, I put them through the ringer because I want to see what they're going to do with a stranger. Mm-hmm. What they're going to do with invasive kids that might like pull their tail and all these sorts of things. The resource guarding, though, is another thing I see a lot of pushback against. They've stopped doing it at a lot of shelters, that test, because they think it's inaccurate. Personally, I think how it's being assessed and how the dog's being read is inaccurate. Is it really resource guarding? Does the dog just want to keep the item because they're hungry? There's all these levels of things. So what do you think about that?
To me, it's essential because I see almost all dog behavior seems to be resource of territory, access to people, food. And I feel that mild resource guarding is sort of like practicing for when a really valuable resource comes along. Mm. If I see mild resource guarding, it's kind of a warning bell. It's like, well, will the dog escalate if something they really want comes along? I love the assess a hand temperament testing. I love everything Sue Sternberg does. She's a genius. Yeah. And people who have gotten their feelings hurt by being told that a dog's unadoptable or something, that's not the problem. There is no problem with her work. It's all fantastic. One of the most interesting things she taught me was that if you repeat an evaluation several times, like stroking the dog's back, why does she say 3 times in a row? The point is not whether the dog reacts to being stroked on the back. It's what does it do when it knows you are going to touch it again? So how does it behave when it sees your hand coming for the 3rd time? Does it accept it? Does it ignore it? Does it try to push back? Does it play with you to get your hand away? There's a million ways that dogs can express discomfort and make you stop unwanted behavior. I shouldn't say there's a million ways. I counted 20 behaviors that have nothing to do with threat that a dog can do if it doesn't want you to do something. These behaviors are not growling, they're not staring, they're not barking or threatening. They're just creative ways that dogs have in their behavioral repertoire to make something stop happening. It could be something as silly as spinning around. And my friend has a Shiba. If people come too close, he does the Shiba butt slam on them. And the people stand there, they're completely bewildered. Why did the dog hit me with its rear? And that the dog is like, yeah, don't come close. It's not aggressive. So I feel that the resource guarding test is incredibly important. It might not show you what the dog will do in the home. It might show you worse than the dog will do in a home. It might show you better. But every piece of information is a question. And then every question that you ask in any kind of science always leads to another question. So you have to progressively ask questions, and you never get to the end in science. You know, every research project spawns a host of questions, but you need to know as much as you can. So the dog that guards its food bowl, that's a pretty basic behavior. It's guarding. It doesn't want the assessor hand to come near its food. Does it bite hard? I've thought that the assessor hand should really be redesigned to have a pressure meter and a reservoir of fake blood. Then we know if the dog's biting hard and how hard is it biting.
Right. Right.
But anyway, just incredibly revealing. Any kind of resource guarding needs to be done. Whether you accept the test results or not, it should be done. And then you work from there. Okay, look at the rest of the dog's behavior. But stopping doing an evaluation just because you think the results might make more dogs look less adoptable, it's not really acceptable to me, because the adopter is the important one. Whoever adopts the dog, I really feel that their needs and their rights come first, as opposed to shelters where the dog's needs and the dog's rights come first. And for whatever reason, the fact that adopters get bitten is not important to them.
Right. Well, and I have to wonder, I mean, if I worked in a shelter, or even if a dog in the rescue showed any kind of resource guarding, I wouldn't place it in a home with children. So at least then you can start to, if you still want to adopt that dog out, you can at least make steps to make it safer, I guess. I'd probably, any dog that resource guards when I test it is a no for me, because there's just too many potential issues with that behavior when the dog gets in a home and starts possessing more things and stuff like that. But yeah, I find it really strange that people don't do that. And I actually had a lesson, it was really interesting, with a little beagle on Sunday. And there was a 2.5-year-old kid who was actually very little inappropriate, but very dominant with the beagle, because he'd just go and take the beagle's toys and push him out of the way and tell him no. And you know how kids are, like, that's mine, so go away, dog. They don't have any bad feelings about telling the dog no. And the dog got something he shouldn't have. And so the kid just went up and grabbed it right out of his mouth. Like, let's see what happens. The dog got it back, and I took 2 steps toward that dog, and he gave me that hard stare.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so I told the parents, I was like, look, your kid can take stuff away from your dog, but I doubt other people's kids can do that. So if you have visiting children, be very aware of that. But it was really interesting to see that change in the dog with the kid and a stranger,
Yeah. Wow. That's so revealing. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And yes, there's also that dichotomy in many behaviors where, yes, this dog is a protection breed. Your Cane Corso might love your children and will protect them to the death against your children's friends. People are not aware. They think, oh, the dog loves my kid, but
Right.
it doesn't realize the dog sees other children as a whole different class of strangers
Right.
or intruders or whatever. But what a great beagle. Totally clear. Kid can do anything. Other people forget it.
I'm like, oh, I wish I would have videotaped that whole thing, but you can't go back and be like, oh, can we do that again?
Yeah. Yeah.
I imagine you learned a lot about dogs and temperament and how to choose the right dogs, because in your program, you didn't want to just take in a bunch and have them not pass. You wanted all of them to pass. I mean, I think sometimes I see that happening where they take dogs they think might work, and then they
Yeah.
just, maybe adopt them out or spend lots of time rehabbing them. I don't even know if it would work, honestly, if the temperament's not there in the first place, but
Well, of the dogs that we adopted at the Hearing Dog program that had passed all of our evaluations and, passed like the first week or so with vet visits and things like that, still only about a third of them graduated to become hearing dogs. There's just a lot of things that can happen.
yeah.
With a young dog, we took dogs that were 7 months to about 2 to 3 years old because we didn't have a puppy raising program, and puppies can change so much. And we had to keep them in the kennel. It was a super enriched kennel with play groups every day and lots of volunteers, and some dogs going home for weekends with volunteers. It was still a kennel.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. So kennel stress on the best temperamented dogs, after a few months, it would start to show up. So we had to get them out fast.
Yeah.
That's why they had to be so trainable. High food drive, high social interaction drive. Toys, okay, nice, but you can't always expect that with a shelter dog. Mostly food training. And the good ones, just flew through the program. And some might need a couple extra months of socializing or just more training in one area than another. But even with all these rigorous evaluation protocols, only a third of the dogs graduated.
Oh.
Which it's pretty good because some of the programs that have extensive breeding, fostering, and puppy raiser programs they have a way better graduation rate, of course. They also have way more expenses. Like to graduate a dog from Hearing Dog program cost about $30,000 per dog. The big programs for big service or guide dog programs, usually it costs them $60,000 to graduate a dog.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's a lot of this stuff is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But basically, finding dogs with fabulous temperaments that could not be ruined by previous owners, that were still trusting and loving, and would accept prefer to be with a person over all of the things at the shelter. Like when I finally open that kennel and take them out, they want to be put on leash, or at least they're not terrified of a leash. And they strut out. They ignore the barking dogs in the aisle. They jump on me. They're happy with me. I take them out of the shelter. They ignore other dogs. They ignore cats. I've had to test dogs next to dead horses and dead skunks in an animal control yard.
Okay.
They don't have to ignore other people, but they shouldn't be afraid of them in the distance. So I want a dog that his number one goal is to be interacting with a person. And it should like other dogs and not be aggressive with them. But basically, the relationship is the primary thing. And we replaced them with people who were not professional dog trainers. If they slacked up on the training a little, the dog still has the relationship to fall back on, that it wants to communicate, it wants to be with the person, and it's going to be a great hearing dog, even if the training after the placement is not perfect.
Yeah, I look for that in the fearful and even the feral dogs. There's always that bell curve. Even really fearful dogs still want to be with the person. You can see it. They might be afraid to actually show it too much, but there's a real difference. Like even when you touch them, they'll go, oh, soften, whereas another dog might go stiffen up or something like that. So yeah, it's really interesting. I actually was it's just an aside, but the shelter I volunteer for did a FaceTime with me of a dog that was feral that's doing some strange behaviors. And I'm like, you guys just think, you guys see so many feral dogs that you know which ones can be rehabbed. And then there's like this maybe 3% that are showing really aggression towards the handler versus just being afraid of being on a leash, you know?
Mhm.
And these I call them girls because they're under 26, all of them. And they're fantastic. But they all know this, you know, and they always call and ask me if they're having trouble just to make sure. But I'm like, you guys know, you don't even need to call me.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Well, that thing about them melting into your touch is so crucial, because when I handle a dog in a shelter, I I often get the feeling it wants to live under my skin.
mm,
It wants to melt its whole body next to mine. And that's so wonderful. It's just a wonderful dog because it wants everything and it wants to be with me. And if it is afraid, at least it is afraid of the environment, but I am the safety zone.
mhm,
Like when a dog jumps up on me for security, I'd rather adopt a fearful dog that is clinging to me and trying to get me to pick it up than a dog that sees me as the problem.
right.
You know, the fearful or um, difficult dog that sees me as the solution has potential
Yeah.
because it's a relationship. But the dog that sees me as a problem, and I see this a lot in the Bali dogs, that some of my friends' dogs that I've spent a week with them and they're trusting me and they want to be petted. And I think, wow, everything's great. I'll be pet sitting for this dog. And I've made a connection with a Bali Heritage dog. And she's so friendly. And then I do something like block them from going into a room where a dog is eating. And all of a sudden it's, oh, you're not my friend. I see now. I was wrong. The dog is thinking, I was wrong to trust Martha. Because I did something and I didn't realize how fragile the relationship was between the dog, the Bali dog, and a stranger that it had decided to accept.
Mm,
It wouldn't do that with its owner. They're usually
right.
very, very appeasing, passive, wonderful, sweet with their owners and their owner's family. But the distinction between stranger and owner is so different. And if they accept me, it's on a provisional basis.
So talk about moving to Bali, and you
Oh,
told me
okay.
before you've been there 6 years, and a lot of your content that I'm really interested in is about the Bali dogs. So talk about that a little bit. And
Well, just to add to what I was saying before, is when I go to the Gaia shelter, I don't see this dichotomy of stranger versus staff. I see the dogs that are in love with the staff, and there's 140 dogs, two main areas. Most of them are running free in a large area with a lot of staff supervision. But these dogs are so thrilled to have visitors. They're thrilled when a stranger comes in the gate. They don't guard the gate. Some of them hang back and bark because they're afraid, but the ones that have been there the longest are usually desperate for a pat from the visitor and they want treats and they're not acting anxious. They're not shying away. And that just surprised me so much, that these dogs were so adaptable that if they were treated well, got plenty of food, and had this experience where they could choose to run away if they wanted, or they could go and greet a stranger, and the strangers give them so much social attention. I was blown away because I did not think a Bali dog could be rehabbed, adjust, and be so open to strangers. But every time I see the dogs in a new environment, I'm completely shocked because my old assumptions were wrong. The dogs are so adaptable that however I see them, the way they behave at the beach, the way they behave in a street, in a home, in a shelter, totally different. So I'm always learning something new.
I'm sure there's factors that affect all of that. It would, I mean, it would take a while to figure out what they are. I mean, in a shelter, I always think dogs don't necessarily have a a person to either possess or connect with. I mean, they have many people. And so it's kind of like, if there's one bone in the room versus 8 bones, it might be harder to there's a lot going on there. Maybe they can't quite have some of those behaviors that you see with the owners, but then also they have the influence of all the other dogs to kind of lead them to that more outgoing behavior too.
This is something that always puzzled me, and it made it so hard to evaluate dogs in a shelter. Really difficult, because it doesn't apply to dogs that are so social that they have no concept of stranger. Mm-hmm. I call those dogs, they have a philosophy that you could describe as one world, one pack. We are. and basically that socialization window does not slam down at 3 or 4 months. The dog is selectively bred to be a breed like a golden or a lab or a poodle that maintains the ability to make bonds throughout life with no, with ease, mm-hmm. not needing a long period of with a new person. So here's the conundrum. Forget about those dogs, because they are always going to be great with everybody. Take a dog that has a strong instinct to bond with one person or one family. And that could be cattle dog, German Shepherd, could be any of most of the breeds that are not like ultra companion, ultra domesticated dogs. So the dog is ripped from its owner and dumped in the shelter. Once in the shelter, dogs go through about a 3-week grieving period, I've noticed. If they were bonded to somebody and I adopted them for hearing dog, they might go through 3 weeks of low activity, low eating. But after 3 weeks, they would start to bond with a trainer. And poodles seem to grieve the most, even though they're also a social breed. What happens was the dog's in the shelter, and it goes through this grieving period where the staff think, oh, well, it's just not very friendly, but kind of scared. We'll just give it time. And of course, that's the right thing to do. Then the dog has no bond. And what happens is it appears to like everybody equally. Any stranger is not a stranger because there's no owner.
Right.
So everybody's on an equal footing. And the dog is open to being friendly with anybody who gives it a chance, who acts appropriate. The shelter evaluates the dog. Wow, he's good with everybody. What a wonderful dog. And it is, until it bonds with one shelter worker. And then you start to see the dog mistrusting other people, because until it has a bond, it cannot perceive us versus them. It doesn't have a social group, so its behavior is totally different. It's looking for a bond, so it kind of interviewing everybody. Are you my person? And the same could be true. Are you my fellow dog? Yeah. It wants to bond with a fellow dog. And usually what happens is this very friendly social dog gets rave reviews from the shelter, and it gets adopted. And within a few weeks, it starts to feel feelings of territoriality. It starts to prefer one family member. Even if it loves the whole family, it starts to notice strangers. And it starts to bark a little. And pretty soon you have yourself back to the normal cattle dog temperament, which is adore the owners. Anything else that comes on the ranch should be bitten. Snakes, strangers, strange dogs, strange predators. Really, on an Australian ranch, there are not many things that need to be tolerated, except the owners and the livestock, right? But this could be any dog. And so the new owners say, whoa, you said he was great with kids, but he won't let my kids' friends in the house. You said he was great with dogs, but he's starting to fight. You said he loved everybody, but if I take him out, he barks at men. So all these things happen, and the shelter is like, well, what did you do wrong?
Right.
And really, nobody's in the wrong. The fact is, the dog wanted to have a bond. It didn't have a bond. When it got a bond, it behaved like a bonded dog with a social group. And that's also why we need to screen out fearfulness and all types of aggression, because as soon as the dog is bonded, all those things plus territoriality will start to occur again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a natural process, but it means that we make very flawed decisions on adoptability in a shelter. And I don't really see a way around that.
Yeah, unless they keep them long enough that they form a bond with someone. I go in as a brand new person sometimes, and the dogs have never met me before. I've never cared for them or anything, and they'll behave differently to me, especially, now that you're saying this, especially if they've been there enough time for the staff to go, I'm not sure about this one,
Mm-hmm.
because then now they have their kennel, they have their people.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I prefer to adopt a dog that's been in a foster home for a month or so.
Yeah.
You get so much more information. You know what it behaves like when it is a pet in a home with a territory, the walls of the house or the walls of the garden. And there's another thing that I think is really misleading. This 333 mantra.
Oh.
It's absolutely true that the dog needs time to adjust and it will start bonding. The reverse is also true. 333 can mean at 3 weeks, you see the beginnings of territoriality and defending the house. At 3 months, you see intense fear of strangers. You see resource guarding because the dog has finally found the resources that it wants, whereas it didn't have any before to defend. Oh, and the 3 days, it's 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. After 3 days, you definitely need to let dogs have time to settle in, but they can settle in for the worse, not better.
This is true.
So I see people online saying it's been 9 months and I followed all the rules and the dog is just getting worse and worse in its behavior and I'm distraught because this is just not going well and the dog is miserable and the family's miserable. People keep giving the advice, oh well, the 3 months, just give them another 3 months. No, what's happened is the opposite of the dog blooming and developing and becoming wonderful. Some dogs bloom into territoriality and resource guarding and biting. They bloom into all these things that you just didn't see at the shelter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I volunteer for a foster-based rescue because of that. And plus I like to foster and have the dog in the house, but we also can then, when they go to an adoption event with the foster handling the dog, then we get to see, is this dog now going to let other dogs come say hi, or, people get in the vicinity of the foster as well. Thank goodness we don't have major issues in the rescue. Because we kind of did once they trusted me after I lived here a while, we kind of did a revamp on how they were choosing dogs. And plus here, we don't have a lot of serious issues. It's really fascinating. And I think also with puppies, people get a puppy and the puppy comes home and it's real quiet and it kind of is hanging out in the corner by itself. And they think, oh, how fabulous. What a nice, easy puppy. But it's really afraid. And then there's a timeline, like 9 months, that dog will start, instead of being afraid, it'll start going forward.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, all of a sudden my puppy went from this to that. And it's like, no, it's been happening the whole 9 months. You just didn't realize what was going on.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Love is blind and people tend not to see these little things. They get used to the different behaviors. But there's also a phenomenon where at a certain age of maturing, instincts that were not mature are ready to be triggered. And they might never be triggered in the dog's lifetime, but sometimes just one incident can happen. Mm-hmm. And it's not that the man yelled at the puppy and now it's afraid of all men. The puppy was ready to form an opinion about strangers, and some person making a stupid mistake or grabbing the dog or yelling at the dog might have been the trigger for the instinct to arise and become full formed, but it wasn't the cause. You know what I mean? Something would have happened at some point to make the puppy realize strangers are dangerous. But before whatever goes on in that maturation level was there, the instinct couldn't as easily be awakened. Like the first time a border collie sees sheep. I mean, my border collie had never seen sheep, and she was 6 months old, and I took her to an agricultural fair, and she was so terrified of the sheep in the pens. I mean, I was like, wait a minute, your father, my dear, is a national champion sheepdog trial winner. Why are you doing this? And I was very disappointed. And I wasn't planning on doing herding, but I wanted a border collie with a confident temperament. And here was this nervous, skittering creature. And so I thought, okay, we went up into the stands, and I sat very gloomily on the bench, and my puppy cowered next to me, but she was looking around, and she noticed down in the arena that there was a border collie herding sheep. And she pricked up her ears, and within like 5 minutes, she was trying to drag me to the arena to get to the sheep. It was like a miracle. From then on, it's like, dogs chase sheep. They're fascinating. I must. And bingo. So the dormant instinct was triggered by seeing another dog doing it or seeing the sheep running. I don't know. But so many things happen like that. And people blame the environment. But really, the dog was ready to start guarding the house or ready to start guarding food. Unfortunately, not all instincts can be kept dormant throughout the whole dog's whole life. Like with fighting breeds, if everything goes fine, you can prevent that instinct from ever arising, and you won't ever know whether fighting was in the dog or not. But sometimes it can be triggered if it was in the dog to begin with. The best possible raising is to not allow unwanted instincts to ever get triggered, but we can't always do that.
Yes. And especially don't let them practice it over and over and over.
Yeah.
I think also in the reverse, right? Like, because I see dogs that have been treated horribly. I won't go into how, but you can imagine, I'm sure. But that dog, once given a chance, will become a really awesome dog because that has always been there.
Yeah.
So I think like temperament testing, a lot of times people are like, oh, you're just tearing the dog apart and tearing it down and all these things. And I'm like, well, no, I'm actually looking for that diamond in the rough. That dog who may have had a really bad environment, maybe, whatever might have happened to it, wasn't treated well, but can overcome it. It just needs a little help. Those are the ones I really like. And then they go on to be a nice, safe family dog. Maybe not in a super busy household or whatever. They might have some limitations, but I feel good about putting that dog out in the world.
Yeah. The desire to connect socially was not tamped down. It was only temporarily appeared to be erased.
Yeah.
And it's such a strong part of the dog that it arose again when it had the chance. And that's another thing about the Bali Heritage Dogs. They are cautious. They're on the fearful side. They have this incredible compensation of adaptability and resiliency. So they might obviously have been hit by a car, but once they have learned to avoid traffic, they're not afraid of cars. They trot along and they know exactly the trajectories of each vehicle. And they're not afraid. They simply avoid them as you would avoid
like a
heavy leaves falling on you, or I'm not afraid of a hot stove because I'm not going to touch the burner.
Right.
I have no fear. I see the dogs at the shelters that come in and they have just, they've been horrifically abused or neglected or lived in a cage for 3 years until they kind of turn to jelly. I see them develop muscles and happiness and they start to trust people. This can happen in a few months. I know some dogs take years, but very few of the dogs at the Gaia shelter that I visit were actually feral. Quite a few of them, I've just seen these miraculous changes. And I think it's because even if you have a dog with basically a fearful temperament, if it wants to be with people and it has resilience and adaptability, it can recover.
Yeah.
And a lot of these dogs, I would have bet you huge amounts of money that they were never going to be normal. And yet A month or two later, I visit the shelter again, and a mob of dogs swarms at me. And oh my God, there's the one that wouldn't stop barking at me a month ago, and it's like, hi, hi, hi. It's pretty wonderful. It's wonderful. You mentioned something a little bit ago about how few truly aggressive dogs you meet in the stray population in your area. I started making a video of threat behaviors in dogs, and I have 20,000 edited photos of dog behavior. I looked at my files, and I was desperately searching for photos of dogs that were seriously threatening me. They're all loose, just seeing them on the street. I have probably several thousand photos of fear behavior, avoidance, fear, escape. I came up with about 50 photos of dogs threatening me, and some of them were photos of the same dog. So really, I had even fewer photos of dogs who were actually lowering their head, staring at me, coming forward slowly, not going to give me a chance, because dogs here have learned that people can protest and fight back and shoo them away. Most of these dogs were not going to come all the way forward. But the dogs that were defending puppies, if a dog charges me seriously and hopefully breaks to a halt when I wave my hat at it, if it comes out like a freight train, barking and showing ears forward, eye contact, just absolute aggression, it's a female. By the time she calms down and I've waved my hat and I've moved away to a safe distance, I notice that she's nursing.
Wow.
To any intact female, puppies are the most important survival resource of all.
Yeah.
And to any intact male, females and estrus are the most important resources, the most precious resources. And those are the resources they will risk injury for.
Yeah.
All the other resources, even their territory, they will do everything short of serious behavior. They will not risk their own safety to defend those resources.
Yeah, that was in the notes I had. I thought that was really interesting that most things they're not going to risk getting injured over.
Yeah.
But these few things they will, mama dog with pups and female and heat. So, but both of those are survival, passing on their genetics. So, which is the ultimate goal, I suppose, of us being.
It all makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one reason I couldn't get enough photos of direct threat were because I have plenty of photos of dogs threatening other dogs, but I wanted photos of their faces threatening me, and I just didn't have it. I had enough for a slideshow, and that was it. So I realized, wow, the actual level of threat to a person is incredibly rare in Bali. There are plenty of dogs that are bluffing, but they're fearful. They look ferocious, they're barking, but their ears are a little back and they're not coming forward, or they dart away the minute you take a step forward. That's not true threat.
Right.
So it made me realize, yes, these dogs are not what you would call aggressive. And I was afraid of the dogs the whole first year I was here.
I can imagine.
Yeah, well, they were barking at me, and I was afraid to walk on these narrow lanes, and the dogs look really ferocious, and they're barking up a storm, and sometimes they're gathering their neighbor dogs to confront me. So I stayed on the main streets where the dogs are more socialized and more used to just ignoring people. And usually they've trotted to the main street from their territory to scavenge or just, see what's going on. Because the same behaviors that those dogs showed, if it had been a protection breed or a herding breed or any of many other types of breeds in the U.S., the next step would have been I would have been bitten.
Right. Yeah.
But these dogs were all display. It was all a very carefully graduated series of display signals with the intent not to bite me, but to make me go away from the territory. And as soon as I left the territory, they were happy and they relaxed and laid down again.
Yeah.
Or if the owner came out and chatted with me, the dogs would like, okay, I guess it's all right. Rah, 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 still barking, but the owner would either shoo them away or the dogs would decide on their own, okay, I'm going to go back in the compound. No, nothing big going on here. So I had to learn that these dogs were not going to bite unless I violated every canine convention. If I touched them, yeah, I deserve to be bitten. They don't like being touched by strangers. If I corner them,
Right.
especially if a dog is frantic because I'm blocking its access to its territory, then it's panicking. It's desperate to get back to the territory, and it might run by me. And theoretically, it might give a snap on the way. But I have to learn to recognize behavior of a dog that's really fearful, but I'm blocking it, because then I'm cornering it, and then it might bite.
Yeah.
But aside from being actually touched, I feel, if I'm not actually going to touch a dog, I feel very, very safe. Especially if I've got my tribute of pork rinds.
Right. So how do the Bali people react to all the dog activity? Do they shoo them away, or?
If it's affecting them, they'll shoo them away. But generally, dogs are kind of responsible for their own activities. If they're let loose, it's just accepted that they will go and do dog things. Mm-hmm. And most dogs learn from puppyhood that grandma with a broom, well, watch out. grandma's interested in keeping the lane clean and keeping dogs out of the kitchen. And farmers will throw rocks if the dogs are destroying the rice crops. Mm-hmm. So they learn to be shooed away. And actually, the greatest threat is if I bend down and take off my sandal, the dogs leave. They know the next step is if somebody will throw a sandal at them, or if they're close enough, smack them with it.
Right.
So yeah, so you can, just as the dogs have a slowly graduating series of display behaviors, so can a person. A person can pick up a broom and the dog says, "Oh, goodbye." They can bend down and pretend to take off their sandal. The dog that's, okay, I get it. So I can have a lot of behaviors that show my goal is to be neutral and invisible, because then they just do their own thing and I get good photographs.
Right.
But if I can't be neutral, then I want to at least defend my personal space.
Right.
And if I'm defending my personal space and they're defending their personal space and there's space for us to maneuver, the dogs prefer that. They don't want to intrude in my personal space.
Right.
They just want me out of their personal space.
And you were saying that the roosters train them early too.
Oh gosh, I have photographs of a puppy being attacked by a rooster, and this all happened in a few seconds, and then the owner snatched up the puppy and rescued it, and nothing happened. But I realized the rooster's bigger than the puppy. It flares out its feathers. It starts doing its kickboxing. Of course, the puppy was terrified. And I thought, oh, okay, it's not just people training the dogs to stay away from chickens. It's the chickens training the dogs.
Right.
Same with cats. Cats are pretty formidable. And in Bali, most people, maybe 50% of the families in my area, at least 50% have one or more dogs. But songbirds and valuable roosters cost far more than a dog. A Bali dog puppy is free. The neighbor gives it to you, or you pay a few dollars. That's it. You've got a dog. Or most likely the dog shows up because there are no other dogs on your property and it starts barking at things. So you give it scraps and pretty soon you have a dog because you feel protected. And if you have a rooster that costs a month's salary at a minimum wage job, you need a dog to protect the rooster from people who might steal a valuable rooster, or snakes or giant monitor lizards that want to eat the rooster.
Oh my gosh.
Because we have pythons and 5-foot long Asian water monitor lizards. They're top predators.
Oh, well, Bali was sounding really nice until that last sentence.
Well, that's why you need a dog. A nice, faithful dog that has an instinct to circle and bark at poisonous snakes without getting bitten.
Right.
Really valuable. And the interesting thing is they tend to bark at snakes. And some of my friends have said they have a special snake bark because a spitting cobra can spit venom for 6 feet. I I see that the dogs seem to have an instinct, usually, some kill snakes, but usually to circle around and bark until somebody comes out and deals with the situation, which is there over thousands of years. That's what these dogs are appreciated for. Do alarm barking, let the people handle the problem of a stranger or a visitor or a predator, do all these things without getting killed themselves by the predator. And there used to be tigers in Bali till 100 years ago, and people were a prey item for tigers. And when I see a Bali dog up on a compound wall, because the tradition of high compound walls around your property persists, even though the tigers are gone. Mm. When I see a dog up on the wall, barking at whatever, surveying, relaxing, I think they're still watching for the tigers.
They don't know they're all gone.
Yeah. Their instinct is saying something wicked this way comes,
right?
And I gotta be watching.
Oh wow! A little bit of a subject change, but I've wondered, reading all your posts, it's like, what is your daily schedule? How do you manage to write all these things and take photos and post it all on Facebook for all of us to read?
Well, one key help is that if you have a retirement visa in Bali, you are required to hire local people, which is only fair. You need to support the local economy. Oh. So, yeah. And so for most people who retire in Bali, they can afford staff. They can afford people to clean and cook and manage things and fix things. And
fantastic.
Yeah. We have wonderful people coming every day. A lot of things are taken care of. And at first I felt guilty. The fact is that people want to work. The economy here makes it better for people who move from other countries. Mm. So usually I get up and either I take a morning walk of about 1.5 miles with my camera, come back and download the photos and do some basic editing. And then I read things on Facebook that annoy me. And I reply, and then I think, there's a lot more to this than I thought. And I keep writing, and then I have a post. Or things that I agree with, or things that are so totally new to me that I'm fascinated. But some of it does start with, like, why are these people saying the opposite of what is true? And then my brain gets going. Because there's a lot of things in the world today of dogs that I call new wives' tales. Mm. They're not old wives' tales, but they're just as false. And they're misinterpretations of dog behavior that are designed to inhibit people from training dogs. So, and then there's just basic misinterpretations due to lack of knowledge of how dogs behave naturally, which I'm learning about. I've had a lot of my old assumptions completely smashed by the dogs here, and kind of had to relearn a lot of things. And I had to learn to read dog behavior much better. I would have told you I am really good at reading dog behavior 6 years ago. And I came here and I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know anything, I'm misinterpreting everything. And so the more I learn, the more I want to teach. And the dogs are so fascinating. I want to share what I learned.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk more about what you said about what people are putting out there is really, how did you put it, is a way to inhibit people from training dogs.
Well, if you want to do everything positive, there's tons of wonderful ways, and I would definitely choose them first. But to brainwash people into being afraid to claim their own personal space or defend themselves, or, for instance, people who are told to let a puppy bite them for months and months, whereas another dog would have claimed its personal space and taught the puppy, no, you cannot invade my personal space without consent. But so a lot of things are presented very well as ideas, but they don't really fit with dog behavior. Mm-hmm. And so I, of course, want to reduce using aversives and try to be fair, try to be humane. take advantage of the incredible methods so many geniuses have come up with that mean we don't need aversives. There's just so much in the world that we can pick now. But to have people brainwashed and intimidated from seeing dog behavior as it is in order to brainwash them against anything that is any kind of pushback against natural dog behavior, I feel that's unfair. It's unfair to dogs and it's unfair to people. If I see an invalid explanation of dog behavior that actually causes problems, if you believe it, then I feel like, wait a minute, for instance, the whole thing of respecting the growl.
Right.
Okay, we need to know that a dog is upset and what upsets it, but moving away and acting to the dog's point of view, acting fearful when they growl, is just certainly going to reinforce the behavior. It's how every protection trainer for 10,000 years have trained dogs to bite people.
Right.
You do something they don't particularly like, or that they're a little bit afraid of, or you invade their personal space. The minute the dog shows that it doesn't like it, you run away and cower like a terrified dog. That's the magic recipe. The next time the dog shows more behavior to get you to stop doing what it doesn't want. So to tell people that they have to back off if a dog is threatening them, according to all these thousands of years of people training dogs to bite other people, this doesn't fit in my mind. And because I've counted up, I think it's 20 now, 20 different ways that a dog can tell you that it's uncomfortable without threatening.
Right.
Like it doesn't want its nails cut. Some dogs tuck their feet under their body and try to clamp down, but they're not going to threaten or bite you. Some dogs will, if you're handling them and they don't like it, they will say, let's play a game, and they start wrestling you. Non-violently, but they're distracting you from what you wanted to do.
Right. They're trying to get out of the nail clipping.
Yeah. It's kind of like the very few dogs who are smart enough to bark at the door in order to make a rival dog let go of its bone and rush to the door. And then the smart dog rushes back and grabs the bone. I asked about this online, and one woman replied that her dog, if she wants to cut its nails or something, it will run and bark at the door, and she'll go to see who was there. I mean, so they are creative, and they have so many different behaviors that they can use to make us stop doing. I mean, there are dogs that scream if they think you're going to do something they don't like, and they scream a lot more before you do. They scream a lot more because they know that you back off and think, "Oh my gosh, he's upset." Right. And of course, we back off because we don't want our dog to be screaming in fear. But the dog has learned that screaming makes people stop giving it medicine or putting on something it doesn't like. And so it's a useful behavior, but it's not aggressive and it's not threatening. So there's just so many behaviors that a dog can do, and you can learn to do those instead of growling, is my point. Not that you should run away from growling, because we need to know what triggered the growl. And not that you should go and punish them for it. But if you can teach the dog a different way that's in their natural behavior repertoire to deal with you, to tell you to stop doing something, why not? Why not? And if you discourage the growling, the dog will find another of all these behaviors to show you, I don't want you to put a leash on. I don't want to go up to that person. I don't want you to take the bone away. There are dogs who just run away with the bone. They would never bite you over it in a million years. They don't want you to have it, so they grab it and they hide. Yeah. That's a non-aggressive way of guarding a bone. Yeah. It doesn't have to stand its ground and growl and snarl at you. Yeah. But because that behavior is rewarded, okay, that'll be the go-to behavior. It's very efficient. It's very useful. So I think the more people know about dog behavior, the more they can make a rational decision instead of just following a mantra. And I know that a mantra is easiest because, for instance, if you're cooking, if you're a beginning chef, you have to follow the recipe or you're going to make terrible mistakes. If you're a professional chef, You throw the recipes out because you know the underlying principles of physics, chemistry, heat, cold. You know the underlying properties of the materials, and you know how to create a dish without measuring something out by a teaspoon. So you can't expect a pet owner to be a professional chef.
Right.
But on the other hand, they also need a recipe that makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe is different than the other recipe.
Yeah.
Although dog trainers are professionals, and I've found you can never apply one thing to every situation, either or all dogs. I mean, I've had different dogs that one dog I would correct her growling because that's who she was. She was very territorial and protective of us. And I needed to tell her, hey, stop it. It's not your job, you know? But then if another dog is growling, I don't know, maybe because I'm pressuring it too much, then I would stop doing that because I don't want to do that to the dog. You know, like it's all these, and that's why I love it, because it's not a recipe. It's not right? It keeps me interested because every owner, every dog is different, and you can work with the pluses and minuses of both of those entities, right?
Yeah.
But
and the dog that is stressed out and growling, okay, now we know more about the dog. We know what stresses it. And I'm hard of hearing, but I can hear growling and stuff pretty up close. And I've been hearing a lot from the Bali dogs that it's pretty rare that they will stand their ground and just growl like they were they had gotten a bone or something and I'm too close. But they do a lot of moaning. And I'd always heard that primitive breeds have a lot more vocalizations, and I think it's because they have more graduated steps, that they can use. Because a dog will be circling me and barking at a distance because it doesn't know me yet, or it never did like me, going through its territory, and it'll be going, and I'm like, gosh, why are you moaning? And it's moaning because it's really anxious because I'm in the territory and it's conflicted and it wants to threaten me, but it also wants to run away from me. And it is just hoping that I'll notice that it's trying to chase me out of the territory. And I wouldn't say chase because I've very rarely been chased. Right. On the other hand, run. But it's more like they want to use pressure to move me out of the territory. So I've been listening to them more, and there are definitely a lot of sounds that are on the scale maybe toward a threatening growl that if you come one more inch closer, I'm going to freak out and bite. So it's just very interesting, all the different communications.
It's interesting. They use pressure to move us.
Oh, yeah. They are experts in pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah. With each other. It's like watching cats sometimes, the way cats will just have this force field going toward another cat, but neither of them is moving. They're just kind of building up this bubble of energy, and finally the other cat can't take it anymore and it looks away. It's like that with the dogs here. They will look at each other, and so much happens when nothing is happening.
Yeah.
Or you see the tiniest flash of teeth the tiniest flash of teeth, and the other dog is like, oh, okay, I get it. Or they flash the teeth back. But there's so little fighting here. I have so few videos and photos of actual fights. Mostly the only fights I've seen have been when males are competing over a female in estrus. And even then, it's not fighting to injure. They might have a little cut, a little bleeding cut or something. Basically, even what looks like the most horrific fighting is just all drama, and one dog decides to leave the area. And that's all the male that wanted to keep the female wants. He wants the other males to go away. He doesn't want to kill them. Right. I think that's one problem we have with pets in houses. The house prevents the dog from going away.
Right. So do leashes.
Yeah.
I mean, like my my ex-feral dog Tipton, he really taught me a lot about how much he wants to move away to avoid conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a person, but it could also be a barking dog behind a gate. He doesn't want to go near it. He wants to go around, and that's why he survived his first year of life to get caught. But I think, like you were saying, with the growling, to show them another way. And like with reactive dogs, if you show them another way to diffuse that pressure, and one of those, which I use a lot, is, moving far away. And then they begin to trust the handler more because we're acting more in accordance to what they think they should do.
You mentioned that, and it intrigued me. The idea that when the dog is upset with something, that you should acknowledge the thing.
Yeah.
That was you, right?
Yeah.
And that if you just ignore the thing, the dog perceives that it's not getting any social support. But if you acknowledge what the dog is either fearful of or worried about, that the dog then thinks, yeah, okay, we're both worried. What are we going to do? And then you say, well, we're going to move away. And the dog's like, that's what I wanted. I wanted distance, but I didn't know how to get it.
Yeah. And then they're like, that human's smart. I'm going to follow her because she knows how to protect me. Instead of walk by the barking dog and put me in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there's all these very simple things that I've started doing. I mean, I encourage them to sniff and walk away because, they do that to avoid conflict. And a lot of dogs, I think, because they're raised on leashes, they don't get to learn those skills, but they're innate. So if we just kind of, revive that a little bit, then the dog will do that. But I mean, like Tipton, he's one of the smartest dogs I've ever met. But if he sees something that bothers him, he'll look at that thing and then he'll look at me. And then he'll look at that thing and look at me. And if I go, yep, I see it, buddy. He's like, okay, she sees it. And I said, come on, let's go in the house or whatever. He'll just turn around and follow me.
That's amazing. That never occurred. I've always had it drilled into my head that if I act unconcerned and cheerful, the dog will lose its fear and become unconcerned and cheerful. So it never occurred to me to actually feel like I was increasing the fear by recognizing it and letting the dog see that I perceive it. But wow, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. There are many things I was taught that I gum onto, and it doesn't occur to me to see a different way. So it's hard for me to change my opinions. And what you just said really is fascinating.
Yeah, and of course, I was taught the same. My first set of dogs, they were trained in obedience so well, they'd walk by anything in a heel. And in a way, I'm like, oh, sorry, guys. Like, I made you walk past that. I maybe shouldn't have. That was asking an awful lot of you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but they were very happy and all that. So they had great lives. Once I started working with the feral dogs, I had to figure out other things. And honestly, Nelson Hodges was really instrumental in this because he really taught me this. It's not like I just came up with it on my own. So I got to give credit, right? But I experiment with it a lot. And I've actually done it with dogs that have a high prey drive too. So if I engage in that with them some, and actually like, oh yeah, where's the rabbit? Where is it? Or where'd the lizard go? Then it's much easier for me to say, okay, guys, it's time to stop doing that. Let's go. Let's finish our walk. I'm experimenting with it, but it kind of makes sense. Like if your child saw, I don't know, a purple one-eyed monster was standing over there and you're acting like nothing's happening, I think the kid might freak out more going, Mom, look. If you go, oh yeah, I see that. That's just a guy in a suit, and keep walking. Of course, if people acknowledge it, but they are also afraid, that's not going to help. So you can't join the dog in its fear when you acknowledge it.
Yeah. Wow, this is interesting. This is fascinating.
This is what I do in my spare time. I like hang out with my dogs and like try to figure out how they do this with each other. Of course, if one dog sees something and barks, the other dog will come up and bark too, right? But it doesn't always lead to barking. Sometimes they just look and the other dog will look, and then maybe the other dog will walk away and then that dog will walk away. So
no, that's exactly what was going on in my mind, because I was thinking, okay, I was watching these two puppies. One of them was investigating something in a drainage ditch, and the other was wanting to play. But pretty soon it looked at the drainage ditch, and they looked at it together, whatever it was, a lizard or something. So they were not exactly a team, but they were both doing the same activity.
mm-hmm.
And they are friends. They're two older puppies that are friends. And then one of them lost interest and the other followed. But had they not been both watching the thing in the drain, and one of them just walked by, ignoring the thing in the drain, I don't think the first one would have left the thing in the drain. It's like they're semi-bonded, they're neighbor puppies, and they do things together. So the fact that they engaged in watching the drain together meant that when one left, the other was like, let's do something else. I follow you. What else is interesting? What are you doing? So it kind of makes perfect sense in the terms of dog behavior.
Well, now you'll have to see if you can find examples for me.
Yeah.
Keep an eye out for it and see if like the first scenario works, or if the puppy just ignores, if the other puppy will follow.
And yeah. I'd be watching for that, because sometimes I don't see stuff unless I'm watching for it. Yeah. And then once I've seen an unusual behavior, then I see it. But yeah. I didn't recognize it before.
Yeah, and it's I've been very fascinated because I've had dogs in my house, foster dogs, for 15 years, and how I can bring a dog in. My dogs greet that dog, and usually, especially my more dominant females, kind of greet it by looming over a little, getting in their space a little bit, sniffing kind of stiffly. And then after a few seconds, they'll be like, okay, and they would just walk away. And then usually that new dog just follows them around.
Mm.
And it's like, well, how did that happen? And us humans struggle so much to just get a dog just to follow us,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's one thing I'm trying. I have tons of videos as well. I may not be as organized as yours, but I'm going through them and watching these videos and like, how did this happen so quickly? And my dog Chardonnay would do that and then just go sniff around the yard, and the new dog would just follow her. And she was mostly a jerk to that new dog for a couple days. Mm-hmm. Kind of wouldn't let the dog move around the house freely. She was a big controller of space and controlled resources. She always guarded my husband a little bit, and I think he kind of liked it. But so I just hello, But over time, she loosened up and then would start playing. So it's really interesting. I think people get it a little bit backwards from watching dogs, as we typically, the dog comes home, we give them everything right away. Free access to the house, free access to the yard, all the toys, treats, bones. Oh, you poor thing, you've been at the shelter. Let me give you all this stuff. And it's so unnatural in the way that dogs do things. I think we could learn a lot by watching them, how they interact with each other, to bring them in our home.
That goes so against what I've been told, because there's the old saying, begin as you mean to go on, meaning don't do anything extra when you have a visitor, or they'll expect it for life, or with an animal, just treat it like you would if you'd already had it a few months. Act normal, basically.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, okay, So in theory, it would work better if we were a little bit cold and distant and gave the dog lots and lots of affection, but not go overboard. Because I've had people tell me that going overboard in the first few days, where you naturally, feel sorry for the dog, and it's so entrancing to see it discover a new toy or love to go on a walk, it just miraculous to see it blossom. But you blossom them into something like the plant, Audrey the plant in Little Shop of Horrors,
Right. Exactly.
and
Feed
so
me more.
and maybe it's not the cannibalism, but it's separation anxiety. I've heard people tell me that all of this overwhelming in the first few days of adoption can create separation anxiety where it wasn't before, because it's just like an overdose of a wonderful drug.
There's actually, I'll send you this study I'm reading. It's by Dr. Udell, and she's at the University of Oregon, and she studied attachment styles in dogs and humans.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And then there's a connection with the attachment style and separation anxiety.
Oh, okay.
So I'll send that to you. I'm writing a book about feral dogs, so I'm doing a lot of research right now. And so I've come across a lot of her studies are about relationships with humans and dogs and how we can, help the dogs be more confident, more outgoing. And to do that, you have to have like a safe base, which I think is what you said before, that the human has to be a safe base, not too permissive, but not too harsh either.
Yeah.
So
yeah, be trusted and predictable. Yeah.
So it's pretty fascinating. I told my kids they're so lucky because authoritative parenting raises the best kids too. So all those rules they had and all those expectations, did them well. They weren't happy at the time, but the video that I watched, I looked at, I didn't know you had a YouTube channel, so I found that too. Because I Google, I look up all my guests, and there's a lot of good stuff on there. But there was one called Drop the Bone and Step Back.
Oh, yeah.
All the dogs in the yard were like vying over all these resources, from bones to a bucket to, wasn't it like a hole in the ground or something too?
Yeah.
And so it was, I see that in my own dogs where they all have something to chew on. They'll kind of trade it, and someone always wants the bone the other dog has is always better, right, than the bone they have.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that? Because I know you talk a lot about resources are, you think, one of the main influences.
Well, this household, I was pet sitting there for a month, and they have 5 dogs that are theirs and 4 foster puppies that are either rehabbing from paralysis or just they haven't found a home for them yet. And then there's 2 or 3 dogs that come and visit every day. So it's sort of like a dog daycare, because the visiting dog gets some extra food. So these people are really, really responsible, and they know that beef bones are the safest. So the yard has about 50 beef bones in it, all old. When there's new beef bones, there's a little more conflict. But these were old, old dirty beef bones that didn't have 1 ounce of organic material except bone, And so the whole scenario in the play session with these dogs was, the only bone that matters is the one I have, that you have, and I want what you have. And so each interaction was really kind of exciting, because I realized they're not just going to go pick up another bone until they're really disappointed, and they realize they're never going to get the bone, or the other dog is the grouchy old woman that that is never going to play with them. And so if they were frustrated, they might pick up another bone with the intention that other dogs would then come and interact. And one dog was really grouchy and made the 8-month-old puppies flip on their backs and just lay there. And there was a nice interaction where the younger male went up to the older paralyzed female, and he was so polite. You know, he showed he was advancing, and yet he was showing every signal like, I'm not really intruding on your bone, but it sure looks better. And it was just really interesting because I realized that resource guarding something mildly valuable is just practice for when the real thing comes along. And they just need to learn all these behaviors. Mm-hmm. Like I figured out that King of the Hill, when dogs play on a dirt pile, and there's tons of sand piles here that the construction crews leave. Everybody's building projects and stuff. And playing King of the Hill and claiming the top of the dirt pile is just a playful rehearsal of get off the bed or I'll bite you.
Right.
You know, don't you dare get back in bed after you go to the bathroom, human, or, you know, or this dog isn't allowed on this bed. And then I realized, oh, okay. So all this guarding of valueless resources is just practicing a behavior, a useful behavior, not aggression. At this point, you know, it's play and display. And then I read, I hope this is true, but I saw, I don't remember if it was a video or one of my wolf books, but there was a wolf behavior that involved an adult wolf parading around like dogs do with an item, but something kind of like an old deer leg, or, you know, not something that had just been laying around that nobody wanted. But the adult would parade around with the item, and the puppies would follow, and the adult would very deliberately drop the item. And of course, the puppies would pounce on it. So the puppies would instantly pounce on the dropped item, only to be met by the adult, you know, having a full-fledged display of get the hell away from my old deer leg. The puppies are shocked, but the behavior was almost instinctive, that the adult wanted the puppies to follow around and be interested, and then dropping it on the ground and then punishing the puppies for coming near was training them by instinct or whatever. But the puppies were learning, this is how an adult looks when it's guarding. This is the sound it makes. This is the expression it has. These are the teeth it shows. And now the puppy can recognize the behavior of an adult guarding an item. Because puppies have so many behaviors that they can do, but it seems to me they have to learn to read when they see it in others. Especially like between 4 to 6 weeks, they go from just biting and jumping and trampling and grabbing to realizing that the other puppy is snarling, so maybe I don't want to jump on him, or maybe I do. But they are actually reading the other's behavior instead of just doing all these instinctive puppy behaviors. It looks like they're playing together, and they are, but they're not reading the pushback. Yeah. And they're not reading the invitation to play. They're like their own little things, like toddler humans that do parallel play, and they're not really reading the other kid.
Right.
And so this wolf behavior, I thought, okay, for whatever reason, it's teaching the puppies how to recognize a guarder.
Yeah, very important skill.
Yeah.
Because if dogs don't know that, they can't really live peacefully together.
And I guard things. Once I read that, I started doing, when I have a dog that's grabbed something that I don't want it to have, I take it away, or I make it drop it, or I trade for it. Whatever I do to get the item out of the dog's mouth isn't really important. The important thing is that once I have the shoe, I put it back down on the ground. Mm-hmm. And of course the dog thinks, yeah, it's mine again. And I'm like, no, I'm going to guard it with my body language. I'm going to tell you no. But mostly I'm going to hover over it, and I'm going to give you glances. And the dog usually realizes, oh, she's guarding. Mm. And then I pick up the shoe and I put it down again. And if the dog comes to get it, no, I'm guarding my shoe. And sure, in 10 minutes, if the dog finds another shoe, it's going to get that shoe, and it might guard it or it might hide it. But the point is that after I take something away, I try to establish I have the right to guard my things. And you should be able to recognize my behavior when I'm claiming something, because I might be claiming a kitten next.
Right.
I might be claiming my pizza slice, and I don't want to be aggressive, but I just want to have just one more level of communication that dogs should recognize when people are guarding things, or when a person is guarding their personal space, because it's not aversive. It's just communication of signals.
Oh, it's using their own language.
Yeah. There's a whole movement to tell us that if we use the social bonding and positive dog social signals, if we mimic those social signals, dogs will understand instantly and bond with us, which is true. But we're also told that if we mimic any of a dog's aversive signals or aggressive signals, that the dog will not have a clue what we mean, and if we react more, it'll be abuse. So therefore, dogs can only read humans using dog positive signals. Dogs, we are told, cannot recognize the behavior of humans using the distance increasing behaviors of dogs. And that makes no sense to me.
No.
We have very similar social behavior. We have similar social structures. So why can they only recognize what you would say distance decreasing signals, and they cannot recognize distance increasing signals from a person? Especially if they've lived with people all their lives, and they pretty much, they can recognize human behaviors pretty well, even though we're confusing and have ape behaviors. We also have very dog similar behaviors.
Yeah, I think it actually just is so dishonorable of the dog's capabilities and also ours. I mean, I've heard, people can't possibly do that without going overboard or scaring the dog, or, you know what I mean? Like causing harm. It's like, well, we do that with our own children or spouses, or, hey, I'm busy working, I don't want to talk right now. Or, I mean, we have language and dogs don't, but I think dogs are that's their body language creatures.
Yeah, and we are too.
Yeah.
And aside from our confusing apish behaviors, I think there's a lot of similarities. And I like to tell people, no, I'm not I'm not anthropomorphizing. I'm caninomorphizing.
Right.
Let me say that again. I don't anthropomorphize. I caninomorphize.
Yeah.
Because a lot of my understanding of human behavior, if I look at it in terms of dog behavior, it's more understandable.
Right.
The social skills that humans have, especially things like when people will tell me dogs don't feel jealousy, that's a human construct. And I realized, wait a minute, jealousy in humans is simply resource guarding.
Yeah.
And when people say a dog is only resource guarding because it's afraid that you'll take the item away, therefore it's not aggression, think, wait a minute, once you have switched from fear to aggression, there's no fear left. So you can't really treat the person or the dog who's showing jealousy as being fearful. Once a person attacks a rival lover of their spouse, they're no longer afraid they're losing the relationship. They're using aggression to hopefully keep the relationship. Behavior in humans that's identical to dogs. It's just that we would prefer to give it our lofty human names like jealousy instead of saying he's resource guarding his girlfriend.
Right. Oh, I totally do that with my dog trainer friends. We break down human behavior using terms.
Yeah.
Like he has an unstable temperament, or like all this stuff. And it actually helps me understand people a little bit better.
Isn't that funny? Like dogs for many of us people, who were shy as children, or maybe not very socially apt. Maybe dogs were our training wheels to help
Maybe.
us understand our fellow humans.
Yeah, I was definitely shy as a child, but we only had one dog. So I don't know. I don't know what kind of, I mean, he was my friend. I don't know what kind of impact he had though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked that dog because we moved a lot and he was like my constant buddy.
Oh, how sweet.
But I didn't have dogs as an adult till I was 42, maybe?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Maybe 40. I'm trying to think. My youngest child was 8 because my husband was military and we were moving, and sounds like your your situation a little bit, but
I thought I had a cruel life because I wasn't allowed to have a dog until I was living independently.
since I got dogs, I'm just fascinated, especially because I've had groups of them and I can see them just figure out all these complex issues, and they just seem to do it better than humans sometimes. A lot
Yeah.
less hurt feelings, and they're clear on their intentions. They're not like being subversive or passive aggressive or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Tell me about how people can learn more from you. I mean, I know your Facebook page, but then you have a Patreon.
I'm on Facebook a lot, and so I post a lot of my thoughts about hearing dogs or dog temperament or dog behavior, and some of my artwork and just whatever. I started my Patreon account because I wanted everything in one place, and because I have so much material now that's triggering. I cannot put dog sex and violence content on Facebook, even with a trigger warning, and I don't want to upset people.
Right.
But those of us who are fascinated by conflict and reproduction, here I am in this incredible laboratory of dogs roaming around, and almost every dog I photograph is a pet or a guard dog, technically, and maybe not a family pet, but a dog that is allowed loose. And dogs might get out potty when somebody's sweeping the lane and then go back in, or they might be out all day, or they might always have the freedom to come and go. But most of them come home at night and patrol the property and bark. And they like to guard wherever they get fed, so they tend to guard their compounds. And they have tiny territories. So I'm seeing dogs that nobody is interfering with them, breeding, mating, fighting. Dogs are quarreling outside of somebody's house. They might throw a bucket of water on them, but they don't really interfere. If they're females in heat and they realize that there's now 12 dogs outside their house, they might lock her up inside because it's annoying.
Right.
But they might not actually have any objection to her having puppies. Or they might have a religious preference. But whatever it is, the dogs are behaving in ways that they do naturally with each other. And I'm there taking photos. So nobody is trying to make this dog do anything. I see all their territories and I see their fighting, and mostly they're just their displays. And I see a lot of breeding, and I can't really put that on YouTube as public. So anyway, so Patreon has levels, and most of the content is free if you join a free subscription. And then some of the more triggering content is at a $5 a month subscription, or a little more for even more triggering stuff. I don't exactly know how to say this because I'm not really in the business of porn, but I don't want random people interpreting normal animal behavior, as something different.
Yeah. X, double X, triple X.
I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? And I catch myself saying, is this video suitable to put as public or just for free members? Because there is a penis there in the midst of all that fur, It's like, how do I decide? And then, of course, anybody who's had their dog attacked, if you show pictures of a dog fight, it's going to trigger our most horrible memories of when our dog was attacked or killed. So, I don't really want to be messing with people's minds like that unless they want to see stuff.
Right.
Unless they want to see the nitty gritty of dog behavior.
Yeah.
Got this incredible opportunity. I'm spending all day editing photos and going on walks and following dogs around. And when I pet sit, I get to go to different villages and see all their dogs. And, it's like a fascinating place. And I see a lot of tragedy. And sometimes I think, did my years of going to animal shelters and seeing tragic situations and tragic dogs that are doomed, did that harden my heart, or did that, I don't know. I had to focus on the positive.
Yeah.
When I would walk by, I estimate I have walked by 200,000 dogs in my career. That's just walking by the kennel saying, oh, there's a Mastiff, there's a Chihuahua, da, da, da. I walked by, and I know that half of those dogs were euthanized because that was the euthanasia rate at the time.
Yeah.
So I've walked by 100,000 dogs that were doomed. The only way I could cope with it was to think, I am going to find a hearing dog, and I am going to find a dog that could be a wonderful pet, even if it didn't pass hearing dog, because I could bring back dogs that were good potential pets back to the SPCA that owned the hearing dog program.
Yeah.
I could bring back adoptable animals, but I go home with a truck full of 4 adoptable animals and 1 potential hearing dog, and maybe a litter of kittens or something, and there's still hundreds of dogs that I saw that were doomed or had been abused or whatever. I am able to concentrate on the positive because I see really sad things here. I see neglected dogs, bald dogs, suffering dogs. All I can really think of is, well, if I can make the Bali Heritage Dog appear as it is, as a valuable, wonderful creature evolved for this culture with genetic diversity that's like nothing else in the world. If I can make people treasure these dogs with my photographs, okay, that keeps me on a positive note. If I can teach people more about dog behavior and learn myself, even though I saw a fight and the dog is bleeding, okay, well, maybe people can learn from this and I can learn from this. I just have to concentrate on the positive, because I could cry all day at the bad things I see. And it's a hard thing to go out, get attached to puppies. It's really sad, but the puppies I love the most are the most bold ones. And they're the ones that wander into traffic and get killed.
Mm.
The shy ones that I would never adopt as a pet, the shy ones that hid in the bushes, they're going to make it.
Yeah, well, I purposely do not, I'm not on any of the local like dog rescue groups or shelter groups or any of that, because it would be it's just overwhelming.
People sometimes kind of not accuse me, but they point out that there's a lot of tragedy and abandoned puppies and starving dogs and neglected dogs and abuse. Like in any part of the world, there's a fraction of the population that thinks they're right, or just is sadistic, and that I'm giving a sugar sweet impression of dog life in Bali. But that's my choice. I choose not to make people upset and beg for money by showing bald, scabby dogs. Or, I have plenty of friends who that is their goal, and they raise huge amounts of money, and they do it for a good reason. It's just that I want to show dog behavior, and I feel that people will pay more attention to dog behavior if they don't have to see things that are triggering and tragic.
No, I agree. I don't put that stuff on my Facebook page either, because you can go watch the ASPCA commercial if you want to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And honestly, if that's where my head stayed all the time, I'd be really depressed and not very productive, I don't think, after a while. I think people that focus on that side of dog rescue or welfare, over time, they decline mentally.
Yeah.
And so I've made a conscious choice of like how I balance what I do with the rest of my life. I could go all in 24/7, saving dogs, seeing horrible things. But, I just thought, well, I know it's there. I see it, but that's not what I want to concentrate on. I concentrate on helping the dogs I can, or like you, bringing value to a dog, to the entire world, right? I mean, you probably have exposed this dog to so many people that never knew there was a Bali Heritage Dog. So I think it's great. I certainly enjoy it.
Well, I hadn't really thought about the worldwide impact, because I was just thinking, if people could treasure these dogs instead of buying purebred foreign breeds from a puppy mill, or just adopting the fluffy pom mix from your neighbor instead of getting a Bali dog, that would be a big thing, because whatever's just around the environment you kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Oh yeah, well, my golden, my golden might get bitten by a snake, but my Bali dog, will avoid the snake. So therefore, I need to have a Bali dog to protect my golden from snakes." But why not get the Bali dog in the first place?
Right. Because there's no status in it, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, the Kintamani dog is there's only 5% genetic difference between it and a Bali Heritage Dog. It's a little heavier set dog that lives in the Kintamani region, and theoretically it has some Chinese chow blood, probably more like Chinese village dog, not show type quality modern chow, not modern show type chow, probably primitive Chinese village dog, the Toulouse. But supposedly they're a little more protective, more seriously guardy, but they're fluffy. They have a beautiful, fluffy, husky type coat, and they have been adopted as Bali's national dog.
Oh.
They're quite beautiful, and now they're a show dog. And I went to the specialty, and all of the Kintamanis were, oh my gosh, they were accepting the judges touching them, and they were trotting around and doing posing. They had professional handlers. They were fabulous show dogs now. They're in that same village, because the village, the specialty was held in a village in Kintamani. The village dogs all came to watch and hang around the arena and mooch treats from people. And the village Kintamanis were scruffy, and some of them looked like they had a little modern chow in them. And some of them were like very curious. Why are 100 completely strange dogs in our stadium?
Yeah.
Because a dog in Bali rarely sees a dog it doesn't know by scent or sight. They're very territorial, and very few of them wander. So any dog they've never met or smelled before, like on a motorcycle tire, is a shock. So these village dogs were completely startled and shocked, and they all came to the stadium and looked at the freshly washed, combed, beautiful Kintamani dogs. And there they are. They're heavy set with long coats, with 2 years of undercoats hanging around. And it was just hilarious, because like, here's this village dog, this land race, where some of them have been plucked because they had the right coloring, like no piebald dogs, solid color, 4 solid colors only. And already a few generations down, they're starting to look more elegant, pointier noses instead of heavier, beautiful coats. It's just a transformation. And why can't? But the Bali Heritage Dog is short coated and has 100 different looks. And if only, why would I say, if only they could become a show breed and become valued as Bali's national treasure? Well, then they're going to change.
Yeah.
They're going to become a show dog, and somebody will decide what colors are allowed, and the behaviors will change. And so it's just a conundrum, fun to think about, but maybe not practical.
Be interesting to see how the temperament of those show dogs changes and how quickly.
I know a lot of it's socialization, but the Kintamani dogs at the specialty, only a few of them panicked when the judge wanted to evaluate them. And those were the puppies that were like under 9 months old. And some of the more amateur breeders that were like local breeders that didn't have professional handlers and, or kennels that had a few generations down. When I read about epigenetics, I could see, okay, so 3 generations of being trained, pampered, ultra socialized pets. Has that made a difference? That you couldn't achieve by genetic selection for a dog that's more open to strangers and more adaptable? I don't know what it is. But the Bali dogs that I meet that have been raised from puppies, even if they had a bad start, they're like normal family pets of any primitive breed that trusts its own family superbly and is cautious and avoidant of strangers. They're not that different if they're raised and socialized the way you and I would.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. But I think the temperaments would change in the show dogs.
Yeah.
For whatever.
Yeah. Better or worse, who knows?
Yeah.
So what is your Patreon? Of course, I'll put it in the description. So
okay.
if they want to check it out, they can go to the description, but what's the website?
Well, it's patreon.com. And then my account is Fauna Botanica.
All right. Fauna as in
Fauna Botanica. But then again, the name of my account is Dogs Talking.
Okay.
With a capital T for talking. But I probably should have chosen something easier. But anyway, that's what it is.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna check it out for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, my triple X dog stuff.
I know. So I do have the YouTube account, but it's not my main thing.
Right. And then, of course, your book would still be good.
The book is Lend Me an Ear, and it's about the temperament, selection, and training of hearing dogs. Awesome. But I have a whole program. I train online courses for people that want to either train their own hearing dog or learn the techniques for clients. So I offer a lot of courses online specifically to teach dogs to do alerting behavior.
Nice. Oh, cool.
And so my book was published first in 1997. So a lot of the techniques don't take advantage of the tech we have these days. It's the same training philosophy of getting a dog really, really motivated to want to jump up and go into action when it hears a relevant sound. As opposed to a rote behavior, it's a relationship, and the dog needs to be motivated and really, really eager to alert, or the whole thing just doesn't work. So I recommend the book. I myself think it's fascinating, but if people want to learn training techniques, sometimes they choose an online course instead, just because tech is amazing and has made everything so much easier.
Yes, I agree. I love it. I can connect with more people and help more people and do this on Zoom.
Yeah. This is so much fun.
All right, last question, because it's the title of the show, is what have dogs taught you?
I think dogs have taught me to never say never, because I'm a person that likes to generalize and have strong opinions. And whenever my opinions get too strong, a dog comes along and says, yeah, well, look at this. And then I have to reorganize, but it's all for a good cause. I think they've taught me that their communication is so complex and so amazing. And they've taught me that a dog that doesn't particularly like people, except maybe its owner or it has no owner, if it sees me walking along, it might decide to walk with me for no reason except it wants a walking, exploring companion. And so why do dogs walk with people? It's a very basic question. They could do their own thing. But I've had dogs that I never petted. I didn't give them a treat. They looked at me walking and they said, hi. And we looked at each other from 10 feet away, and we never went closer than that. And the dog walks with me for 2 kilometers.
Huh.
Why does it do that? It's a mystery.
Yeah.
It already has its own territory, and maybe it feels a little safer with a companion. But why didn't it go walking with another dog? I've made no effort to have a relationship with this dog, and yet dogs want to walk with me. So this is real basic to the whole thing where you said that obedience training is basically trying to get a dog to follow you.
Yeah.
And yet that's like how dogs began, following people.
Right. And now we try so hard.
Now they don't want to do it.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, this is fun. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for all the things you made me think about. It's like a lot of great new ideas.
Yeah. Well, I love talking. That's how we come up with new things, is talking to each other, exploring different things and comparing notes.
So much fun. Thank you so much.
I just want to thank Martha Hoffman for joining me. This has been a real honor to have her on this podcast. I hope you all have found it just as fascinating as I have to listen to all of her observations, her experience, and also musings about the Bali Heritage Dog. I hope you all will join me again next time. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit subscribe or follow. It really means a lot to show your support for the podcast. Thank you.